This is a great crowd. We have a really interesting panel today to bring to you. And so I'm going to give a bit of an introduction, talk about our topic, which is electric vehicles. And then we're going to start asking some questions of the panel. And like the other sessions, if you want to ask questions, you can find anybody on the panel after the session. So I'm going to start over here. So we've got Keith Kerman, who's the Deputy Commissioner for Fleet Management and the Chief Fleet Officer at the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. Here he runs the largest municipal fleet in the country and one of the greenest. We've got Joy Gardner here from Empire Clean Cities, which is tasked with working within the metro area and Lower Hudson Valley around energy, environmental, and economic security, and the removal of petroleum from the transportation system. And we've got Joe DeSimone, who's with us from GreenSpot, which is an EV infrastructure developer based out of New Jersey. Joe also, in a previous life, worked in the city bike world, so you can see his stuff all around the city right now. And then we've got Earl Lewis, who is the Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation, overseeing policy planning and enterprise services, and he's also the chair of the Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council in Maryland, which is tasked with basically our topic today, which is bringing together different stakeholders to try to figure out how do we solve this EV opportunity that exists in front of us. So I'm actually missing my weekly Tuesday morning count with my daughters. Every day when we go on our 20-minute drive to school, we count all the EVs and they see all the new models. And I've got it, we're actually charting it and seeing that growth week over week. You know, it's noisy, but we're seeing week over week, more and more electric vehicles are on the road. You're seeing fleets coming out with electric vehicles on the streets that have got New York City on them, right? And I'm from DC, so I see a lot of those in DC as well. I think the actual numbers on that on a countrywide basis, we're seeing sales getting into the 5% range of battery electric vehicles. Some states are actually seeing upwards of bridging on 20% of new vehicle registrations are coming in with battery electric vehicles, not just plug-in hybrids and battery electric, but battery electric alone, right? We now have light-duty pickup trucks on the market. We actually have the models for heavy-duty Class 8 trucks coming to market, right? EVs are really here, and I know this. Everybody here has been paying attention. I think every session before us has talked about electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure. How do we make sure that this transition that's happening is one that is going to be, successful for everyone? So what are these equity issues that we're going to solve for? Is it going to be successful technically? Are we going to put strain on the grid that's not going to work? Or the supply chain that we have to deal with? How are we actually going to make this happen? So I want to kind of put it to the panel. I'm just going to start with you, Keith, and give you guys a couple minutes just to talk about, this is a multidisciplinary sport. You got to know technical issues, you got to know economics, you got to know power, electricity, engineering. How are we going to make sure that this works, and how are you going to work with all of these different stakeholders that you're seeing in front of you, this diversity of stakeholders, to make this happen? So Keith, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you very much. On behalf of Mayor Adams and our Commissioner Don Pinnock, always happy to be able to discuss electrification. I'm not sure what it says about us as parents, but I used to sit out Cafe Luca, my kind of diner on the Upper East Side, and my two boys, we used to watch the bike lane and count how many bicyclists go down the bike lane. So we're all using sustainability to keep our kids distracted. So on behalf of the City of New York and all of you, we now operate the largest electric fleet in New York State, 4,000 vehicles and growing. We're in the midst of buying about another 1,000 replacement vehicles. We operate the largest charging network, 1,350 charging ports and growing across level 2, level 3. Level 2 is kind of slow charging. If you're not familiar, level 3 is fast charging. We also have solar carports, and a new round of solar carports are being delivered and rolled out in the city as we speak. So there's a lot that can be done on this. But it's not an easy transformation. So first thing, I'll just do a plug. Along with the United States Department of Transportation, the Volpe Center, DCAS, my agency, just published what we call a Clean Fleet Transition Plan. You can Google it, and I think it's entertaining holiday reading. And it outlines in detail how to pursue electrification for a large fleet. In our case, with 191 types of vehicles. On behalf of the city, we operate almost everything, 120 on-road, about 71 off-road. And the good news is there is a lot of potential to electrify the fleet. We found that 84% of our on-road models, 81% of our off-road models will have an electric option in the marketplace either now or within 5 years. So that's a huge change from where we were just 10 or 15 years ago. I always remind audiences, 15 years ago, someone did a documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car? The electric car industry was in such dire straits that the main action in it was to memorialize its fall. Now, of course, we're in the opposite place where everyone thinks the electric thing, oh, it's absolutely happening and it's easy and it's the future. If you're a Marvel fan, it's Thanos and inevitable. That is not true either. It is an achievement. It's hard, as was indicated. So really kind of quick things, and I'll pass the microphone. One, you can get a real return on investment in electrifying. So this isn't something you have to bring people kicking and screaming to. Light duty on medium duty, you can save money and electrify. Save on maintenance costs. We've published on this about 70% on an all-electric vehicle. Save on fueling costs, and fueling costs have exploded recently, so that is better. And you should be able to use electric vehicles longer. We're estimating an additional 2 years of life, and that's part of our savings calculation, because you will not have an engine, a transmission, fuel lines, catalytic converters to be stolen, right? The Prius is one of my favorite vehicles, but it's also the favorite for thieves out there. So there's a real return on investment, but there is this challenge in charging especially. And you have to kind of learn how to implement a charging program. You have to partner with your utilities to develop charging infrastructure. That will be a big challenge. We're making it happen. We're moving forward. But certainly that part of it is a big change to the system. Now to have your vehicles and based on some other work DCAS is doing, soon maybe your buildings, all dependent on the grid. And so that, I think, is really one of the big challenges. The other challenge that I'll note is not every vehicle application has an effective electric model yet, right? We don't have a garbage truck that can plow as an electric unit. We do have a garbage truck that can pick up garbage. We don't have fire ladders that are electric. So we don't have a pickup truck that can plow either. So there are still some challenges and growth needed on the infrastructure side of developing vehicle models.
Hi, everybody. Joy Gardner, Empire Clean Cities. We are a clean transportation nonprofit, and we're also the local Clean Cities Coalition out of the U.S. Department of Energy's Vehicle Technology Office. And so we're part of a national network of about 75 different coalitions across the country with the goal of reducing emissions in the transportation space. So technology is changing rapidly, it's advancing rapidly, and so nobody can be expected to sort of be an expert in every facet of this, except for maybe Keith. But I think part of the benefit of working in this space is leaning on your partners. And so we're able to tap into our great stakeholders here in the city. We have some great partners. We can call up the DCAS team or somebody at the Department of Transportation and say we have a stakeholder who is interested in piloting, this kind of model of EV in their fleet, or this alternative fuel, or installing curbside infrastructure. Would you mind talking to them a little bit about your experience? And so, being able to and willing to share that information with partners is a key way, I think, to accelerate EV adoption and infrastructure. We're also very fortunate to work very closely with the Department of Energy and the national labs. And so when we partner with our stakeholders on projects, if there are any hiccups along the way, we're able to tap into that technical resource. And so I think really making sure that that team of experts is available to help us is a great way that we're able to move projects forward.
Hi, I'm Joe DeSimone, the Chief Operating Officer of GreenSpot. And GreenSpot, we're a private EV infrastructure development company. Bigger company, does property management and development on a larger scale. So we build high rises. So the actual building portion of the EV infrastructure is what we do on a daily basis. The hard part is for us, and what we've definitely been challenged with since 2014 when we first started. We installed the first public curbside charging in Jersey City. And from there, we had a vision both for electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure, autonomous vehicles eventually, and how do we get from where we are today to where we need to be? So, the biggest challenge for us has always been the real estate, right? So we do own some real estate, but primarily the people that install EV infrastructure are not the actual property owners. So getting the access to the property, the rights to the property is really where like a public-private partnership helps, because we're able to help each other with lead generation, get access to those properties, and then develop the infrastructure needed both for the short term and also give them an option and an opportunity to have and expand upon that infrastructure over a long period of time. So primarily, Green Spot is investing. So we're bringing in private equity as well as our own equity into the picture. And we see the economics in EV charging infrastructure and owning and operating that equipment for the long term. We believe that aligns our incentives properly so that if the equipment breaks down, we're directly incentivized to actually fix it and get it up and running again. So, that's been our main focus and what we feel is really going to drive the infrastructure forward that people need and the communities need around the world. So, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. My name is Earl Lewis, Deputy Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. Maryland Department of Transportation is the statewide transportation entity for Maryland. We've got 10,000 employees, $20 billion 6-year capital budget, 2-year annual operating budget. We operate a very complex network of ports, airports and seaports, highways, 6 different transit modalities. So, we're used to complexity. And yes, I think somebody mentioned this is complex. When MDOT first got involved with EVs, it was about 15 years ago when we became one of the California 177 states. A few years after that, we set a goal of 60,000 registered EVs in the state of Maryland by 2020. Obviously, we had a pandemic in there, but we just passed 60,000 about 3 days ago. Really, December 1st, we passed 60,000. 10 years ago, we had 600 registered vehicles. So in the last decade, we've had a growth in 2 orders of magnitude. That's about a 35 to 40% annual growth rate. The current year, and our fiscal year runs July 1st to June 30th, is on pace to continue that trend. We believe this is something that's going to result in the majority of vehicles being ZEV within a couple of decades. Maryland has the most aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals in the nation, even more aggressive than California. Our legislation passed this past session that has a goal of 60% greenhouse gas reductions from 2006 levels by 2031. Several state agencies and a lot of private sector and NGOs are on the Maryland Commission of Climate Change, which has also been around over a decade, I think more like 15 years. And one of the recommendations that group just made to the legislature and the governor of Maryland is a goal of 75% light-duty vehicle sales by 2030, which is a very aggressive goal. But because of our aggressive greenhouse gas goal, we need to have aggressive goals in this area. I can also say that Transportation Planning Board of the National Capital Region also has a goal of 50% ZEVs by 2030. So in our region, we have aggressive goals, which means it's important that we have collaboration among public and private sector and NGOs. I've had the honor of chairing the Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council, as was mentioned earlier, for the last 7 years. That's a group that has electric utilities, EV recharging firms, several state agencies, organizations in the environmental area. And a big part of being successful is bringing all the people together that you're going to need to help plan this out moving forward. I would say that the electric vehicle recharging business is primarily a private sector run business. So you're not going to get this done without the private sector being involved, and obviously you're not going to get this done without the electric utilities being involved. There are going to be significant challenges to being aggressive in terms of making sure that the grid is capable of being able to handle aggressive goals. I will say I spent 20 years in government, and before that 20 years in electric utilities and gas utilities. They're going to make a lot of money, so they're going to help us get there. They have an incentive to help us get there, and they're very active. Maryland Public Service Commission also we're in the 4th year of a 5-year pilot program where they've allowed electric utilities to install EV recharging and also work with the private sector entities that are part of that in various rate-related programs and analyses that involve similar stakeholders that are on ZVIC. So Maryland, we've had a head start because of those relationships. But one of the challenges that's going to be especially important to deal with is the equity-related issue in certain parts of urban areas as well as rural areas where the grid may not be capable today of handling the higher loads. It's going to be important that the state government and the federal government continue to give incentives for people to buy EVs to make sure we get more people in those rural areas to make the recharging investments more sustainable. So we have the load there that helps the private sector entities be able to make the case. I can go on forever, but I'll stop there.
So thank you all for kind of giving an overview of where your heads are at in this space, which I think, this is a diverse group of stakeholders representing state, local government, the private sector, nonprofit world. I mean, we're missing somebody from the utilities maybe here, but we do have a really good landscape here. And one of the elephants in the room right now is the massive amount of federal funding that is going into EVs right now. For fleet owners, I don't know how you guys are thinking about it necessarily, but certainly on the infrastructure side, the NEVI program has come out, and I'm leading our EY's work with the state of Georgia, so I get to live and breathe this every day. But I want to get some perspective, maybe Joe, starting with you. When you think about this NEVI program that's come out, and it's come out strong with DC fast charging as the first place that we're going to be, can you talk a little bit about, as you see these RFIs and some states are now putting out RFPs for actual implementation, like what's going through your head as a developer? What are the things you're looking for in this market? And I know GreenSpot maybe focuses more on level 2, but can you give us a snapshot of the brain of the developer as you see this 50 states plus Puerto Rico plus DC coming out with $5 billion worth of funding all at once right now, just looking at one of these programs, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, of course, for EV infrastructure developers or the companies that monetize the equipment and software, it's a big opportunity for all of us. Very exciting times ahead of us. I think there's big questions around the approach. I think whether or not DC fast charging is the right answer, and that investment is worthwhile, and will get it, the United States to where it needs to go. But if you look at studies done by McKinsey and Company as an example earlier this year, we're going to fall fairly short. So that $5 billion in DC infrastructure, it costs about $150K to $200K to develop one DC fast charger. And that's a huge sum of money. So if you're talking about the country, they're estimating needing about 1.2 million public fast chargers or chargers in general. We're only going to be able to build somewhere between 30,000 and, maybe at the top end, 90,000 DC fast chargers. So it's the money is going to fall short. They're estimating we're going to need closer to like 35 billion to get to where we need to be by 2030, which is much more than the $5 billion right now. So where's that money going to come from? And how are we going to get the work done that we need to do? There's going to be, one of the most successful programs that we've been involved with so far has been the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Partnership. So GreenSpot as well as Blink were the two vendors selected to help out Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and DC develop public infrastructure for electric vehicles. So the reason why that works is because there's nonprofits like the Clean Cities organizations or coalitions We work with Virginia Clean Cities as well as the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalitions. And what we do is we work together to develop the infrastructure. So the first part of that equation is the real estate. So that $5 billion is going to go nowhere if you don't have property to build on. And that property can't be private. So that, cuts it, the amount of property that's available. So then you're working with either cities to develop public infrastructure on their property or other public parking facilities where fast charging is an option. So there's other qualifications, of course, to NEVI. It gets very complex in terms of the chargers you can use, where that infrastructure has to be. So everything kind of has to fall in line, but it's all surrounded around real estate. So the Clean Cities Coalitions, what they do is we're doing our own marketing and lead generation, but they're also talking at a much higher level, especially with municipalities and local governments, to help figure out where that property lies, who's interested in developing infrastructure on their property, and then we can take those conversations and go from there. As far as working with utility companies, there's a big question about whether or not the grid will be able to support the amount of power. McKinsey, again, estimates that EV charging by 2030 will be using about 5% of the entire grid, which is a massive number when you think about that. So I think there's lots of things that need to sort of meet up so that it can move forward. And I think, in terms of public-private partnerships, that's probably the best way that I've seen that actually work.
That's awesome. And I think, you give a major shout out to the Clean Cities Coalition. So I want to give Joy the stage a little bit. Like you act as kind of a matchmaker, like almost the glue for all of these disparate parties that may want to kind of run off and do their own thing. But how do you see your role? Where are you trying to steer this ship as you look at EV charging specifically?
Sure. So each coalition is really hyper focused on their region. So we really want to make sure that whatever projects we're moving forward in New York City and the Lower Hudson Valley are right for us. So that might be slightly different than the coalition in Utah, for example. And so really working closely with our local stakeholders, identifying funding opportunities, advocating for new funding opportunities at the local and state level to make sure that whatever we're moving forward is right for us. So, for example, in New York City, many of us live in multi-unit dwellings. And so some of the projects that other coalitions are working on that focus more on home charging might not be right for the 5 boroughs or most of the 5 boroughs. And so instead, we're identifying sites and partners for large charging hubs and working with partners like Revel and Shell Recharge and NYSERDA to identify some of those areas. Also working very closely with New York City DOT and their curbside pilot and their charging infrastructures and municipalities. And so kind of coordinating, letting them know where we know where some private sector investments are being made so that they can help make decisions on where there's, so that we're sort of making sure that there's, to the best of our ability, real estate being a serious strain, coverage of infrastructure throughout the city.
So Keith, is there an opportunity for fleet owners to be a part of this public charging solution? I know DCAS has done a pilot with some shared charging. It's always been interesting to me to think about, utilization rates for charging are pretty low, right? If there's an open charger, should be used. How's that going? What are you thinking about that as a solution, as a potential solution for your fleets that could have benefits to the community at large?
Okay, so first, DCAS does currently offer 11 fast chargers, 50 kilowatt, to the general public. We also use them for fleet. So there's a hub on Randall's Island, off the Grand Central, where you have the City Field parking, in Staten Island and Midland Beach. So there is a list. You can go online, or I can send it to you. So we are doing that, and we are committing to do 20 additional units. So we do want to have 31 fast chargers that are used by fleet, but also open to the general public. They're getting a lot of use, so it's been very popular, and we're going to grow that. We mainly partner, talking about real estate, with the New York City Parks Department. I have the advantage. I spent 17 years next door at the Arsenal. I'm running citywide operations for the Parks Department, so I know parks a little bit, and they still take my calls. So we do use some of those public lots. And I will say, getting to federal grants, one, I do want to mention, while there's always a limit to the amount of federal money, for sure. I mentioned we have the largest charging network in the state, or the largest in the country. We began that with the President Obama era grants, going back 10 plus years ago. Seems like forever in some ways. But that's actually how that network began. And then we grew it out, right? So it was seeded by the federal government, but then it's been city money and our efforts with support from Con Ed and other grantors that's been growing it out. And we are pursuing the federal grants pretty aggressively. So Mayor Adams announced with the Department of Ed grants aimed at electrifying school buses recently, and we've committed to an all-electric school bus fleet by law by 2035. For the city fleet, as a fleet owner, we will probably be announcing something very soon. Similar support going to the city fleet. I won't jump on our own announcements, but there's already been some progress there. We're also going to be looking to partner on a few fronts with the federal government. One, expanding public charging. So we're going to fund 20 additional, but we may ask the federal government to support going even beyond that. Resilient charging. So a really big issue as we start to electrify, and it's a great thing, but as we start to bring electrification from early adopters and tree huggers to core fleets, Amazon, the New York City Police Department, the Postal Service, right? We function on these operations. We depend on them. We will have to deal with issues of resiliency, backup power, IT resiliency, fail-safe. I mentioned solar carports. That's one of our efforts to do that. But we're going to be looking to partner with the federal government on issues of resiliency. And then I will mention one. It's a technology we want to do. It's not an electric technology per se, but it's an awesome technology. We recently announced a pilot for something called intelligent speed assist, where you have the capacity now to have vehicles that will not speed. Right? Where the vehicle will not let you go above the speed limit wherever you are, whatever that speed limit is, dynamically as you drive. So we've already announced a pilot. You can Google and find out about that. And we're hoping to partner with the federal government as we expand our electric fleet to also introduce this new safety technology. To have not just a zero emissions fleet, but a zero crashes fleet. So in all those fronts, electrifying the vehicles, public charging, resilient charging, and the tie-in between new sustainable technologies and new safety technologies. We're hoping to partner with the federal government, and at least one of those we hope to announce before New Year's.
So that emergency preparedness and resiliency, I think we touched on in the last panel a little bit with the Mark from Sunbelt around how do you actually think about a fully electrified fleet or a fully electrified passenger vehicle universe. Like Earl, as you think about it from a planning perspective, looking at the state of Maryland and being a coastal state, especially, what are the conversations you've had about trying to resolve that challenge?
Well, I think part of the challenge here is that you have an onion here with a lot of different layers. Just speaking about NEVI, the goals of NEVI are tied to what the federal government has decided the goals of NEVI are. We had 5 years prior to knowing that NEVI was going to happen to designate alternative fuel corridors with Federal Highway. We had 22 before we even knew NEVI was going to happen. Once we knew NEVI was going to happen, we added a 23rd. We also added 3 hydrogen corridors as part of that, because now we know hydrogen is going to be eligible for the corridors. But NEVI's goal is to build out a recharging network along the United States interstate highway system. Their goal is 500,000 chargers, I think, by 2030. NEVI is only 5 years through FY26. So you're going to need another reauthorization with some additional funding just to get there. There's also another, that's $5 billion that was given to 50 plus state DOTs. These are going to be, there's going to be 50 different approaches to how that money is going to be made available to the private sector. And those private sector companies are going to have many dozens of different approaches of how they're going to move forward, given it's a private sector business. Our goal as a state is to maintain enough control of the grant process to make sure we get chargers distributed in all the places we need them to be. Not just where it's going to be most profitable for the recharging companies. The other piece of NEVI that everybody needs to understand is that it's a unique federal opportunity, because typically the government has to own an asset that comes from the spending of the federal funding. In this case, the private sector can own the asset. So if you got a 20% match and you got 80% of federal funding, that's basically 80% of capital. That's one of the reasons why Tesla's opened up their network. They can't be eligible to apply for this funding unless they can take all types of light-duty vehicles at their recharging network. So the challenge here is that you know what the objective of NEVI is, but you're going to have other initiatives at other levels to increase the number of EVs that are out there in the public and in fleets. Maryland has goals for its fleets also. I think it's 25% of our new vehicles have to be some type of ZEV vehicle in the up to the FY24 cycle, and then it edges up all the way to 100% in the next 7 or 8 years of the fleet, because government has to be a leader and show everybody this is the direction we need to get to. But you also have the issue with MUDs, which is going to be a tough one, because a lot of the commercial owners of those entities really don't have an incentive to take on that risk. Plus, you have, in the early years you put in recharging, you have these demand charges, which make it really uneconomical to operate them. So there's going to need to be some incentives for public service commissions and other entities to help at least carry on in the early years so that people will make these investments. And obviously, new buildings, new installations, we need to have laws that require them to install recharging when they're built.
So you have all these technical challenges. The economics of charging is a challenge. You've got all of these things, and then I think underneath all of this is that new technology leaves people behind, right? And so I touched on it at the outset. Equity is a major question here. How do you invest this money, either the federal money or the state money, or create your plans and actually create equity as you do it? And I think there's a lot of historical examples of that not happening, and a lot of exacerbating the existing inequities by investing in ways that are not conscious of that. So maybe, Joy, just thinking about how do you think about that at Clean Cities? I mean, is that something that you've got your head around in terms of organizing stakeholders and thinking about what are the impacts to kind of overall the disadvantaged community from the federal term, and how do you right some of those inequities as you make these investments?
Sure. So I think there's a panel later on that dives a little bit deeper into Justice 40, which requires 40% of federal funding to directly benefit disadvantaged communities. And so as a Clean Cities Coalition, that's also our mandate. And the federal government has invested quite a bit. So we are now in phase 3 of a Clean Cities-wide training for energy and environmental justice. And that includes bringing on, in 2023, we'll bring on a community liaison that will work directly with community-based organizations, municipalities, and other stakeholders in New York City's disadvantaged communities to identify what the needs are and make sure that we're addressing it sort of from the ground up. We were also recently part of the New York Clean Transportation Prize, which was about $85 million from Public Service Commission funding that was administered by NYSERDA. And what was great about this project is it was a statewide competition, and teams could pitch in 2 phases an idea. And it could be infrastructure, it could be some way to reduce emissions and improve mobility in New York State's underserved communities. And what was so great about that was that the first round of teams, a group of about 13 were selected as finalists. And during that phase 2, there were 4 months where teams worked in the communities, doing surveying, town halls, working with different community-based organizations, and compensating those community-based organizations for their time to make sure that these projects were actually going to benefit the community. So if it's for example, one of the winning prizes was a new medium and heavy duty fast charging hub in the South Bronx. So in the South Bronx, there's about 13,000 medium and heavy duty trucks that pass through every day. It also has some of the worst air quality in the country. And so, space again being a major issue and power and getting power to some of the depots for these operators was a challenge. And so one way that we could solve that problem was a medium and heavy duty charging hub. But beyond that, we want to make sure that it's accessible to the needs of the community. And so making sure that there is a space for hire vehicle drivers to park, and making sure that there are amenities that make sense for the target audience there too. So that's maybe a prayer room or a cafe for folks to take their mandatory break if you're a truck operator while you wait for your vehicle to charge. And then beyond that, what other services can we operate or offer the community to ensure that this is an option for everybody? And so there are trainings for fleets incorporated in that project. There are EV 101 courses for the community to talk about accessing incentives and how this could benefit, being EV owner could benefit them.
Earl, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the two areas where we failed to pass in terms of making sure that the infrastructure was everywhere people needed it was broadband and wireless. And I mean, I've sat before Public Service Commission in Maryland and been told specifically, make sure that doesn't happen with EV recharging. The NEVI guidance, for all intents and purposes, requires you to follow Justice 40 principles. We've set up multiple GIS layers using several different filters to make sure we know where those areas are. And when we put out our sub-grant programs, which in Maryland, it's more likely to be a notice of grant opportunity rather than RFP because we can move faster that way, that information will be imparted to those that are thinking of applying to the grant opportunity. That we need to be able to structure our sub-grant programs in a way that incentivizes them. So maybe you have, a higher match for the areas that are more developed in terms of EVs, where we know the EV recharging company is going to make more money, but maybe a lower percent match for the areas that we want to incentivize. The other thing you got to remember is that the IRA, okay, has some incredible tax provisions to incentivize the location of EV recharging in areas where they would typically not be economical to go. So we could have a whole different panel on that, so I won't go into that. But there's tremendous incentives that we're still trying to analyze at MDOT. I know other entities are also that would allow for one of the first times a government entity to get a stipend back for making sure recharging gets in the places where they need to be, as well as alternative energy like solar. So the government is trying very hard to make sure we don't have another situation like broadband or wireless, and are putting incentives out there that the people in this room and beyond have to respond to in a way that meets the goals that we want to have as society.
That's well put. And being respectful of time, I think we're at the end of our session. So like I said, please reach out to any of these panelists. I think they did an amazing job and deserve a great round of applause for all these great insights. So thank you.